Welcome to Rain Narrator channel where we take you on a journey of deep relaxation and complete tranquility with the sound of raindrops adding an atmosphere of tranquility and comfort. Relax, enjoy, and prepare to enter the world of dreams. If you are looking for an ideal way to relax or calm your mind before sleep, you are in the right place. Follow us to get the best stories. It all started on a Monday. I remember it so clearly. It was the kind of crisp morning where the light was just right, and I had that fresh cup of coffee in my hand, ready to tackle another week. The office was the same as always, busy, bustling, and full of people glued to their screens. But then there she was. Her name was Emma. She had just joined the team, and for some reason, I couldn't help but notice her the moment she walked in. At first, I thought nothing of it. She was new, and I was used to new hires coming and going. But Emma, she stood out. Not in the way you might expect, though. It wasn't the flashy clothes or the dramatic personality. No, Emma had this calm presence about her. She was smart, and she seemed like she had it all together. The first time we actually spoke, I was just helping her with a project. Nothing personal, just work. But something clicked. As the days passed, our interactions became more frequent. The team often put us together on projects, and we fell into this rhythm. It started with simple exchanges, scheduling meetings, bouncing ideas off each other, and collaborating on presentations. The work itself was fine, but it was those moments of quiet, conversation in between tasks that I began to look forward to. At first, it was all business. Emma was efficient, professional, and never seemed flustered, no matter how crazy things got. And me, I was just doing my job. But over time, I started to notice the little things. The way she smiled when she was excited about an idea. The way she'd laugh, softly but with a sense of genuine joy when something amused her. Slowly, I realized I wanted to spend more time around her. Not because of work, but because of something else. There was a warmth to her that I couldn't ignore. But I was cautious, you know? It's tricky mixing work with anything else. So I kept things professional. We'd talk about our weekends, our favorite shows, and what we were reading. But I kept a little distance. I wasn't sure if she felt the same way, or if I was just projecting my thoughts onto her. Still, every time we exchanged a glance or shared a laugh, I couldn't help but feel a little something. One day we were working late. The office had emptied out, and the only sounds were the quiet hum of computers and the occasional click of a mouse. She was sitting across from me, focused on a report, but I could tell something was on her mind. Without thinking, I asked her if everything was okay. She looked up, and for a moment there was this pause. She smiled, but it was a little different, like she wasn't sure if she wanted to share what was on her mind. But then she did. It wasn't anything major, just a little personal issue. But that conversation changed everything. I had always thought of her as this composed, professional person, but in that moment, she became real to me. She wasn't just a colleague anymore. She was someone who trusted me enough to open up. From that point on, things shifted. We started spending more time together, not just talking about work. We would grab coffee, take walks during lunch breaks, or stay late just to catch up. There was a comfort in her presence, and for the first time in my life, I began to realize how easy it was to talk to her about everything and nothing. It was like we shared this quiet understanding that no one else could see. It wasn't long before I knew that I was falling for her. I tried to deny it at first. I kept telling myself that it was just the chemistry of working together so closely, that it would pass, but it didn't. One afternoon, as we were brainstorming ideas for a new campaign, she reached across the table to grab a notepad, and our hands brushed. It was just a small touch, but in that moment, I felt like everything stopped. My heart was racing, and I could see that she had felt it too. We both pulled back, our eyes meeting in a brief moment of silence, before we continued with the work. But something had changed. The next week, it was even harder to ignore. I started realizing just how much I cared about her. I wanted to make her laugh, wanted to hear about her day, wanted to support her through the little challenges she faced. We were no longer just colleagues, we had become friends, and the bond between us was growing stronger. Then one evening after a long week, I asked her if she'd like to go out for dinner. It was the first time I had asked her outside of work, and I'll admit I was nervous. But when she said yes, I felt a rush of excitement mixed with relief. We went to a little Italian restaurant nearby, and the conversation flowed so easily. I was finally able to tell her about my own dreams and frustrations. and she opened up about her life as well. We both realized how much we had in common, how our values aligned, how our goals mirrored each other's. By the end of the night, I knew I had to tell her how I felt. I remember sitting in the car after dinner, the streetlights flickering outside, and I just said it. "Emma, I care about you. More than I should, maybe." I was terrified of what she'd say, but she smiled, her eyes soft and warm. "I was hoping you'd say that," she replied. From there, things moved quickly. We spent more time together, and the lines between work and personal life began to blur. It wasn't just about deadlines and meetings anymore. It was about sharing quiet moments, supporting each other through challenges, and building something real. Our connection grew from the practical, professional foundation we had built together into something much deeper, something emotional. Months passed and things just kept falling into place. We would spend weekends hiking, cooking meals together, and even debating over silly things like what movies to watch. Every day I was more certain that she was the person I wanted to spend my life with. Then one night, after a long day at work, I knew it was time. I took her to that same Italian restaurant where we'd first gone out, and I asked her to marry me. It was simple, but it was everything. I remember her face lighting up as she said yes, and in that moment, I realized that this journey from colleagues to partners, from practical to emotional, had brought us here, together for life. Looking back now, it's hard to believe how much had changed from that first project we worked on. What started as a professional connection grew into the deepest love I've ever known. It wasn't easy. There were times when work got stressful, and we had to navigate the challenges of balancing personal and professional lives, but in the end, it was all worth it. Now we're planning our wedding. It's a mix of excitement and nerves, but mostly it's just pure joy. I never thought I'd meet someone like Emma at work, but I'm so glad I did. From the practical to the emotional, we built something real, and I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with her. It started when I least expected it. There was a moment in my life when everything seemed to be going smoothly, but that was before I met Emma again. We had known each other for years, but life had pulled us in different directions, and we hadn't spoken in quite a while. I'd moved away for college, and she stayed in our hometown, working her way through life. We were both so focused on our own paths that we kind of drifted apart. But then one fateful day I got a call. It was from Emma. I remember feeling a strange mixture of excitement and nerves when I saw her name pop up on my phone. We hadn't spoken in ages, and I wasn't sure if it would be awkward or if we'd even still have anything in common. I hesitated before picking up the phone, and when I did, her voice came through, hesitant yet familiar. "Hey." "I know it's been a while," she said, "but I think we need to talk." Her words were simple, but something in them made me realize that this wasn't just a casual catch-up. Something had happened, something had shifted, and we needed to confront it. I agreed to meet her at the coffee shop near the park where we used to hang out as kids. That was our spot, where we would sit and talk about everything and nothing for hours. It felt like coming full circle, yet I had no idea what to expect. When I arrived, I saw her sitting at our usual table, looking just the same yet different. She had the same fiery hair, the same thoughtful expression, but there was a weight in her eyes that I didn't remember. She wasn't the carefree girl I had once known. She was older, more mature, and somehow I felt like I was the one who had changed. Maybe we both had. "Hey," she said softly when I sat down, the tension in the air palpable. "I guess we both know why we're here, don't we?" I nodded, not trusting my voice just yet. I wasn't sure how to begin or what to say. We both knew what had gone wrong between us. It was never one thing, really. It was a series of small misunderstandings, unmet expectations, and the way we let time and distance turn our connection into something that felt more like a memory than a reality. We had our moments, but somehow, those moments slipped away without either of us trying to hold on to them. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the cup in front of her. "I've been thinking about us a lot. I know we had our differences, but I don't know, I just felt like maybe we needed closure. Like maybe there was something we never said." I didn't know how to respond at first. I wanted to tell her that I was sorry, but the words felt like they were stuck in my throat. I wanted to tell her that I never meant to hurt her, that I never wanted to leave things the way they were, but I had to be honest with myself too. I wasn't sure what had happened to us, and I wasn't sure if anything could fix it. Yeah, I finally said, my voice rough. I've been thinking about us too, and I don't know, maybe I should have tried harder. Maybe we both should have. There was a long silence between us, the kind that you only get when there's so much left unsaid. The noise of the coffee shop around us seemed to fade, and it was just the two of us in that space, looking at each other like we were trying on remember who we once were. Then she spoke again, her voice softer, almost tentative. Do you ever think about what might have happened if things had turned out differently? If we hadn't let time slip away? If we hadn't let fear or pride get in the way? Her question hit me harder than I expected. I had never really thought about it that way. I'd always assumed that maybe it was just something that wasn't meant to be, that maybe we both moved on and that was that. But as she said those words, I couldn't help but wonder too. What if things had been different? What if we hadn't let ourselves drift apart? Yeah, I admitted. I think about that sometimes, but I don't know if it's too late for us. Maybe we've changed too much. She looked up at me, her eyes locking onto mine with a determination I hadn't seen before. We've both changed, yes, but that doesn't mean we can't try again. We just need to be honest this time. Honest with each other, honest with ourselves. That's when it hit me. I had spent so much time trying to move on, convincing myself that we were better off apart, that I hadn't given myself the chance to really think about what I truly wanted. And the truth was, I wanted her. Not just the girl I remembered from years ago, but the woman sitting across from me now. She was different, yes, but that wasn't a bad thing. It made her stronger, wiser, and maybe, just maybe, we could be stronger together. It wasn't an easy conversation. We talked for hours, unraveling the mess of our past, talking about our fears and insecurities, the things we should have said and didn't. We apologized and we listened. We didn't rush it. We were patient with each other, like we were both trying to rebuild something that was fragile but worth the effort. By the time we stood up to leave, something had changed between us. It wasn't some grand declaration of love or a dramatic moment, but there was a shift. Something lighter in the air, something hopeful. We both knew that there was still work to be done, that it wasn't going to be easy. But we were willing to try, and that was enough. Over the next few weeks, we spent more time together. We didn't force anything, but we let ourselves explore the possibility of what could be. Slowly, we started to rediscover the connection we once had, but this time it was deeper. It wasn't just about memories from the past, but about creating new ones. It wasn't about trying to be who we were, but about embracing who we had become and learning to love that version of each other. And somewhere along the way, it turned into something real, something that felt more like home than anything I had ever known. It wasn't just reconciliation. It was the foundation for something stronger. We weren't the same people we had been before, but I realized that the love we were building now was truer than anything we had tried to force before. We had learned to be honest with ourselves, with each other, and in doing so, we found something that felt like it was meant to be. So yeah, we started with reconciliation, but what I didn't expect was that we would end up here, in love in a way that felt new and yet so familiar. And now every day with her feels like the beginning of something beautiful, something we both had to fight for, but something worth every second. And maybe, just maybe, that's how real love starts. It was a summer evening when I first met her. I was sitting at a corner table at our local coffee shop, staring aimlessly out the window. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over everything, and she walked in, her presence like a light in the room. She had this warmth about her, something that drew people in without her even trying. Her laughter was like music, and when she looked my way, I felt something stir inside me, a feeling I hadn't known I was missing. We exchanged a few words, and before I knew it, we were talking for hours. Her name was Sarah. We began seeing each other often. There was something so easy about our conversations, and everything felt right when I was around her. She was kind, intelligent, and had this undeniable spark. We quickly became inseparable. I started dreaming of a future with her, of days filled with laughter, love, and shared moments. I thought I had found my soulmate, the person I was meant to spend my life with. But then things started to change. One day Sarah became distant. She wasn't the same person I had fallen for. At first I thought it was just a phase, a little rough patch that everyone goes through. But it only got worse. She became secretive, spending less time with me, and when we were together she seemed distracted. I asked her if something was wrong, but she would always brush me off, telling me it was just stress or that she was going through some personal stuff. I wanted to believe her, but a part of me felt like there was something more, something she wasn't telling me. Then the betrayal happened. I found out through a mutual friend that she had been seeing someone else. It wasn't just an innocent friendship or something casual. She had been in a full-blown relationship with him, lying to me every step of the way. My world shattered in that moment. Everything I thought I knew about love and trust crumbled. I confronted her, my heart racing, my mind clouded with a mix of anger and hurt. She didn't deny it. She apologized, but it felt hollow, like an empty promise. I didn't know what to do with the pain. It felt like she had taken something precious from me, something irreplaceable. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. All I could think about was the lies, the betrayal, and the fact that the person I had loved had turned into someone I didn't even recognize. My friends told me to move on, to forget her, but it wasn't that simple. Love doesn't just disappear overnight. I had to work through the pain, to wrestle with the hurt and the confusion. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my work, trying to distract myself from the emotional storm I was living through, but it didn't work. There were moments when I'd hear a song we used to listen to together or see something that reminded me of her, and it felt like I was reliving the betrayal all over again. The anger would flare up, followed by the overwhelming sadness. But even through all of that, I couldn't let go of the hope that one day, things would make sense again. One day I ran into Sarah. It had been months since the breakup, and I wasn't sure how I would react. But when I saw her, standing there with that same soft smile that used to make my heart race, I realized something. I had forgiven her. Not for her sake, but for my own. I knew that holding on to the pain was only going to keep me from moving forward, and while I couldn't erase what had happened, I could choose to rise above it. We talked. It wasn't easy, but we both opened up. She apologized again, and I realized that her apology was different this time. There was sincerity in her voice, a depth to her regret. She told me she had made a huge mistake, one that had cost her the most important person in her life. I listened, not with the intention to hold on to the hurt, but with the hope of finding closure. I told her that I had to learn to forgive for myself. We agreed that we couldn't go back to the way things were, but maybe, just maybe, we could start over. I spent the next few months rebuilding myself. I worked on healing, on rediscovering who I was outside of the relationship. Slowly, I came to realize that while Sarah's betrayal had been painful, it had also taught me valuable lessons about trust, boundaries, and self-worth. I learned that love wasn't just about the good times. It was about facing challenges together, about growing from the hardships, and about forgiveness. And then, something unexpected happened. One day, Sarah reached out to me again. It had been a year since we'd talked last, and I wasn't sure what to expect. But this time, she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't apologizing or explaining herself. She simply wanted to know if I was open to starting again, to see if we could build something new, something stronger. I'll admit I was hesitant. The past had hurt me, and I wasn't sure if I could trust her again. But deep down, I knew that I had healed. I had moved on, and I had learned to love myself again. I told her I was open to seeing where things could go, but only if we were both willing to work through the past. We took it slow. We started dating again, but this time there were no illusions. We communicated openly, honestly, and we both made a conscious effort to learn from our mistakes. The more time we spent together, the more I realized that Sarah was the person I had always wanted her to be. She was no longer the girl who had betrayed me. She was someone who had grown, someone who had learned from her mistakes just like I had. And so years later, I find myself standing at the altar, looking into Sarah's eyes as she walks toward me. My heart races, but this time it's not because of the fear of betrayal. It's because I know that we've overcome so much together. We've faced the storm and come out stronger on the other side. I see the woman I love, the woman who has shown me what it means to love fully, to forgive, and to never give up. When I say I do, it's not just a promise to love her forever. It's a promise to continue growing with her, to face whatever challenges life throws at us, and to never take for granted the beauty of second chances. And that's how we got here. After betrayal, after heartbreak, after healing, we found our way back to each other, not because we were perfect, but because we were willing to fight for love. And that, to me, is worth everything. Once upon a time, in a small, quiet town, there was a young man named Thomas. He was a shy, reserved soul with a passion for writing. He spent most of his days working in a small bookstore, often found among the rows of yellowed pages, lost in the worlds they contained. Thomas had always been content in his solitude, but there was a yearning inside him that he couldn't shake. He longed for a connection, a love that would reach beyond words. And then, one rainy afternoon, a letter arrived. The letter was from a young woman named Lily, a stranger to Thomas, but one whose name had often appeared in the bookstore's log. She had come in several times to browse through novels, always so quiet and thoughtful. Her presence, though brief, lingered in the air. It was on one of those occasions that she had left behind a small note, tucked between the pages of a book she had borrowed. It was an invitation in a way, a request for a letter exchange. "I've always believed in the magic of words, Thomas. Perhaps you'd agree," the note read. "If you wish, I would love to write to you, sharing our thoughts, our dreams, and our favorite passages. It's a long shot, but I think we could create something beautiful in letters." Thomas was taken aback. He had never been one for boldness or attention, and here was a woman, a stranger, asking for something so personal. Yet something inside him stirred, an unfamiliar excitement. Perhaps it was the quiet promise of a connection, one that needed no spoken words but only the written ones, each letter building a bridge between them. So Thomas wrote back. His letters were simple at first, sharing his thoughts on books, the way certain phrases made him feel, the rhythm of life in the bookstore. He told her of his love for solitude, for quiet moments that allowed him to think. He wondered quietly if she too cherished such moments. Lily's responses came swiftly, each one more profound than the last. She wrote of her own life, of growing up in the town, her parents' bakery, and the way the scent of fresh bread filled her childhood mornings. She spoke of her hopes of wanting to see the world, to understand it beyond what was familiar. She wrote of a longing for something more, something that she hadn't yet been able to define. Their letters continued to flow back and forth, a delicate dance of words that grew deeper with every exchange. Thomas shared his insecurities, the doubts that clouded his mind about whether he was truly worthy of love. Lily responded with kindness, with understanding, urging him to believe in himself as she believed in him. As the seasons changed, so did their letters. There were no grand declarations, no rush of emotions. It was a slow-burning connection built with patience and care, one word at a time. They began to share more than just thoughts. They shared dreams of what life could be, what love could mean, and slowly, their letters began to reveal something unspoken, but undeniable, an affection for each other, a bond that transcended the written page. One winter evening, Thomas received a letter unlike the others. It was not just a letter, it was a confession. "I find myself thinking of you often." Thomas, Lily wrote, her words careful, like a fragile secret. Not just the man who writes letters, but the man whose thoughts I have come to know so intimately. I wonder, could this be more than just letters? Could there be something between us beyond the page? I don't know, but I think I would like to find out. Thomas, reading her words, felt his heart race. He didn't know how to respond. He had always kept his emotions locked away, but Lily had unlocked something inside him with her words. He had fallen for her, but how could he tell her? He had never been one for grand gestures, never known how to express the depth of his feelings. So he wrote back. His letter was short but sincere, a simple question, a simple invitation. "Would you meet me tomorrow at the bookstore, Lily?" Perhaps then our words could become something more. The next day, as the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, Lily walked into the bookstore. She was just as he had imagined, graceful, kind, and full of warmth. They stood there in the midst of the aisles filled with books, their hearts pounding in a silence that spoke volumes. "I'm glad you came," Thomas whispered, his voice soft but steady. Lily smiled, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of nerves and excitement. "I didn't know if you would be waiting for me," she confessed, and in that moment there was no need for further words. They simply stood there, two souls that had found each other through the letters they had written, the connection they had built, and the bond they had forged in silence. From that day forward, their love story unfolded like a novel, one chapter at a time. There were no dramatic proclamations, no sweeping gestures. Instead, they built their life together with small, everyday moments. The quiet evenings spent reading side by side, the gentle laughter shared over cups of tea, the shared dreams of the future. The letters never truly stopped. Even when they were together, they continued to write to each other. The words never lost their magic, always reminding them of the tender beginning that had sparked their love. Months passed, and the day came when Thomas finally spoke what he had felt all along. Standing in the bookstore, surrounded by the books that had witnessed their journey, he looked into Lily's eyes, his heart full. "I love you, Lily," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Lily, with tears in her eyes, smiled. "I love you too, Thomas, always." And so, with the same quiet grace that had begun their love story, they built a life together, a life that started with letters, grew through understanding, and blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. They were married in a small ceremony, surrounded by friends and family, their vows spoken softly but meaningfully. They had begun as two strangers, two souls bound by words, but now they were two people who had found their forever in each other. Their love, built on patience, trust, and the quiet power of the written word, would last for all the years to come. And so they lived together, always writing, always loving. Their letters continued, never as a necessity, but as a reminder of the love that had started with words and bloomed into something more profound than they had ever imagined. It all started when I moved to a new city. I was excited but also nervous. I had just graduated from college and decided to start fresh, far from the place I'd known all my life. There was something about this city, the energy, the people, the promise of a new beginning, that made me believe it was exactly where I needed to be. I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, got a job at a small tech firm, and settled into my new life. But even with all that, something felt incomplete. Then on a rainy Tuesday morning, I met her. I remember it clearly. I had just stepped out of the coffee shop, balancing my cup of coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, scrolling through emails. It was that moment when I didn't notice the puddle right in front of me. My foot hit it, and in the blink of an eye, I was on the ground, drenched, with my coffee spilling everywhere. I was embarrassed. I stood up quickly, cursing under my breath, trying to salvage what was left of my dignity. That's when I heard her laugh. I looked up, and there she was, a girl with the brightest smile, standing under an umbrella. Her hair was dark and messy from the rain, but she didn't seem to care. She had these big, expressive eyes that seemed to see right through me, and she was smiling not at me, but at my ridiculous situation. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice full of warmth. I nodded, still feeling like an idiot. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little wet." She offered me her umbrella, laughing again. I guess the universe has a funny way of saying welcome to the city. I laughed too, feeling slightly better. We stood there for a few moments, just chatting about the rain, the city, how I was new here. She told me her name was Clara. I found out she worked just a few blocks away in a small bookstore, and she loved to walk around the city. When it rained, because it made everything feel magical, that's when she invited me to lunch, saying something about her favorite cafe being just down the street. I was stunned by her kindness, and I didn't want to say no. We walked together, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't just some stranger in a city that didn't belong to me. That lunch turned into something more. Over the next few weeks, Clara and I found ourselves meeting at the cafe almost every day. We talked about everything, books we loved, places we dreamed of visiting, things we were afraid of. I learned that Clara had grown up here, and despite how beautiful the city was, she'd always felt a little trapped in it. She had big dreams of leaving, of finding adventure, but like me, she didn't have it all figured out. I don't think I realized I was falling for her at first. She just became such an important part of my life. Her laughter, the way she looked at the world, and it made everything seem brighter. And then one day I realized I couldn't imagine my days without her. I'd find myself thinking about her constantly, eagerly waiting for our next conversation. It was the little things, the way she would glance at me with those eyes when we spoke, or how her hand brushed against mine when we were walking together. Every moment with her felt electric, like something was building between us. And then it happened. It was a Thursday evening after work, and we were walking along the city's riverfront, watching the sunset. The orange and pink colors reflected off the water, creating the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. I glanced at Clara, and she looked at me the same way she always did, with that spark in her eyes. But this time something was different. It was like we both knew, without saying a word, that the connection between us had turned into something deeper. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, my heart racing. All the time. Especially when I'm with you. She smiled, a little shy, but I could see the same feelings reflected in her eyes. I reached out and took her hand, my heart pounding in my chest. Clara, I don't want to imagine my life without you in it. She stopped walking and turned to face me fully, and in that moment, everything else in the world disappeared. I feel the same way, she said, her voice shaking slightly. And then I kissed her. It wasn't a grand cinematic kiss, but it was perfect. It was tender, full of all the words we hadn't said yet, full of everything we both felt but hadn't yet admitted. From that moment on, things changed. We didn't have to talk about it, and we both knew. Clara and I spent the following months together, learning everything about each other. We spent countless evenings talking about our hopes, our pasts, and where we saw ourselves in the future. We explored the city together, shared dreams of traveling, and spent cozy nights at her apartment. Just the two of us, wrapped in blankets watching movies. But like all good things, there was a time when we had to face reality. Clara had always dreamed of going to Paris, to live there for a while. I wanted to stay, to build something here with her, but I knew how much this meant to her. And when the time came for her to make a decision, I wasn't going to be the one to hold her back. I love you, I told her one night. But if Paris is what you need, I'll support you. Clara took my hand and looked at me, tears in her eyes. I love you too, she whispered. But I can't leave you. It wasn't an easy decision. But after a lot of talking, a lot of planning, we found a way to make it work. Clara would go to Paris for 6 months, and we would visit each other as often as possible. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And when she came back, it wasn't just to visit, it was to stay. A year later, I took Clara back to that riverfront, where we'd first realized how much we meant to each other. The sunset was the same, and as we walked along the water, I got down on one knee and asked her to marry me. Clara, you're my everything. Will you marry me and make this life, this adventure ours forever? She looked at me, her eyes shining with love, and said, yes. And just like that, we started the next chapter of our story. It was perfect, like it was always meant to be. We got married in a small ceremony, surrounded by friends and family, with the city that brought us together as our backdrop. I don't know how to explain it, but meeting Clara changed my life in ways I never expected. What started as an awkward, rainy encounter blossomed into a love story I'll cherish forever. It was a reminder that sometimes, the things you least expect turn out to be the most important. And now as I stand next to her, I realize that the city isn't so big and overwhelming anymore. Because with her by my side, it feels like home. I remember the first time I saw her. It feels like it was just yesterday, yet it also feels like a lifetime ago. I had been studying at the university for a couple of months, trying to adjust to life in this new country. I had grown up in a small town where everyone knew each other. So being in a city was both exciting and overwhelming. One afternoon, I was sitting in the campus courtyard, nursing my coffee, and trying to figure out how to balance my studies with the cultural differences. I hadn't really made many friends yet, but I wasn't worried. I figured I'd get used to it. That's when I saw her. She was sitting under the shade of an old oak tree, flipping through a book. I don't know why, but there was something about her. She looked so peaceful, so immersed in her world, yet so alone. She was different from everyone I had seen so far. She wore a modest, long dress that looked as if it was from another place, another time. Her hair was covered with a light scarf, but her face, her eyes, they were mesmerizing. There was a calmness about her, a serenity I couldn't understand but was drawn to. I didn't think I would ever talk to her. I wasn't the type to approach someone so strikingly different from me. But somehow, over the next few days, I found myself seeking her out. She was in the same classes, sitting in the same coffee shops. And then one day, I finally mustered up the courage to sit at the same table as her in the library. I remember my palms sweating, my heart racing. But I somehow managed to say, "Hi, I'm Ahmed. I've seen you around. And I was wondering if you'd like to study together." She looked at me with a gentle smile, her eyes reflecting a bit of surprise, but there was also a warmth in her gaze. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "I'm Zara. Sure, I'd like that." It was a simple beginning. Nothing grand or extraordinary, but for me, it felt like the world had shifted in that instant. We started spending more time together, studying, talking, sharing our thoughts. But the more I got to know Zara, the more I realized how different we were. She came from a family that followed a strict religious tradition, one that was very different from my own. Her family was from a conservative community where religion and culture were everything. Her faith defined the way she lived her life, and I respected that. But me? I had grown up in a more relaxed, open-minded environment. My family was Muslim, but we weren't particularly strict about our practices. I had always been encouraged to think for myself, to question, to explore the world with an open heart. At first, I didn't think our differences would matter. I thought love could bridge any gap, but as we grew closer, the reality of our contrasting worlds started to settle in. There were small moments where we felt the weight of it all. When we talked about religion, I could see the difference in how we viewed the world. Zara spoke with such passion about her faith, her devotion to her family, her community. I admired her strength, but I was also afraid. I wondered if we could ever find a middle ground. I questioned how a relationship between us could work when our families were so different, so distant from each other. But no matter what, I couldn't stay away from her. Every time we talked, every moment we spent together, it felt like we were connecting on a deeper level, far beyond religion, beyond culture. It felt like our hearts spoke the same language. But at the same time, I felt the pressure of the expectations that society had placed on us. Would our families approve? Would the world accept us? Then came the hardest part. I had to tell my parents. I remember sitting down with my mother, my father, and my younger brother one evening, and trying to explain what had been happening. I was nervous, more nervous than I had ever been in my life. My parents had always been supportive of my decisions, but I didn't know how they would react to Zara, a girl from a different culture with a different religion. At first, my parents were quiet. My mother, always so gentle, asked me questions about Zara's family, her background, her faith. My father, who had always been a man of few words, simply looked at me, his eyes searching for something. "Do you love her, Ahmed?" he finally asked. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, but he understood. "Then you must be true to yourself. But remember, love is not just about what you feel. It's about understanding each other's worlds." It wasn't easy, but my parents gradually warmed to the idea. They knew that I was an adult, capable of making my own choices, and while they didn't fully understand Zara's world, they respected my feelings. Zara, on the other hand, faced even more challenges. Her family was deeply rooted in tradition. Her father was a respected figure in their community, and her mother, though kind, believed strongly in keeping their cultural and religious values intact. When Zara told her parents about me, it was met with a cold silence, followed by questions and concerns. How will you reconcile your faith with his? How can you marry someone who doesn't follow our way? Her father had asked. Zara, however, stood firm. She didn't want to give up on me, and more importantly, she didn't want to give up on love. We had so many conversations about our different worlds, about how we could navigate the space between us. We talked about the future, about what we could learn from each other, and how we could create a life together, where we respected both our religions and cultures. Time passed, and the pressure from our families didn't subside completely. But we knew we were in it together. It wasn't easy, but slowly, our love began to prove to both our families that it wasn't a passing phase. It was real. In the end, our marriage wasn't just a union of two people. It was a bridge between two worlds, two cultures, two religions. The wedding was a beautiful mix of everything we had learned and shared. We had a small ceremony where I wore a traditional white suit, and Zara wore a beautiful dress that honored both her heritage and mine. It wasn't without challenges, but in that moment, as we stood hand in hand, surrounded by our families and friends, I knew that love had conquered all. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I would face anything for her. Because in the end, our love wasn't just about crossing boundaries. It was about building something new, something stronger. A love that transcended all that divided us, and instead, embraced everything that brought us together. I'd be glad to tell you my story. It's one of those tales that starts so simply, so innocently, only to twist and change into something neither of us could have ever predicted. Her name was Lily, and I'll always remember the first time we met. It wasn't some grand or spectacular moment. It wasn't even a moment I thought would change my life. We were in high school, sitting next to each other in a class we barely cared about. The kind where you just pass the time until the bell rings. She wasn't loud, didn't try to draw attention to herself. But there was something about her that stood out. Maybe it was the way she listened, the way she could make even the dullest topics seem interesting. Or maybe it was that quiet confidence she had, Like she knew exactly who she was and what she wanted out of life, even at that age. I didn't realize it then, but I was already falling for her. Slowly, quietly. But I was still a kid, still learning about myself. And I thought it was just friendship. I didn't know what love was at that time. We became inseparable over the months. We'd talk about everything, share secrets, laugh about silly things that no one else understood. I remember we'd go for walks after school, just talking about our hopes, our dreams, our futures. It felt like we were the only two people in the world, like no one else could possibly understand us the way we understood each other. I never admitted it out loud, but somewhere in my heart, I knew I was falling for her. I think she knew too, but she never said anything about it. It wasn't a topic we ever broached. The turning point came the summer after our senior year. We spent more time together than ever. We'd stay up late talking about everything, from our deepest fears to the most trivial things. And somewhere between those late-night talks, I realized I was in love with her. I remember one night we were sitting outside on a blanket under the stars. I turned to her and said, "Lily, I think I'm in love with you." There was a pause. Her eyes searched mine, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something, maybe a spark of surprise, maybe something deeper, but then it was gone, replaced by a gentle smile. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked away as if unsure of how to respond, and in that moment my heart sank, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "You don't have to say anything," I added quickly. "I just needed you to know." She turned to me then, her expression softer. "You're one of my best friends, you know that?" She said, "I value you so much. I don't want to lose that." And I knew deep down that she didn't feel the same way. But I smiled, even though my heart was breaking. "I get it," I said, forcing a laugh. "I guess I was just being stupid." But the truth was, I wasn't stupid. I loved her. And in some way, I think she knew it all along. We went on like that for a while, me trying to bury my feelings in her, carrying on as if nothing had changed. We were still the same best friends, still sharing everything. But every time I saw her smile at another guy, every time she talked about some other guy with that little spark in her eyes, it hurt more than I cared to admit. Then one day she told me about him. His name was Aaron. She'd met him at a party and they hit it off right away. They had so much in common, she said. They'd started hanging out together, going on dates, and she seemed so happy. I don't even know why, but something inside me snapped. It felt like I couldn't breathe, like the world had suddenly become suffocating. I tried to be happy for her, tried to pretend that I wasn't aching inside, but it was so hard. I kept thinking, why him? Why not me? It didn't take long before I found myself pushing her away. I started to distance myself, avoiding her calls, turning down invitations to hang out. I told myself I was doing it because it was too painful, but in reality, I was afraid of seeing her fall for someone else. I couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand the thought of her loving someone else the way I had always loved her. And then it happened. The betrayal. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a Friday night and I was sitting alone at home, trying to distract myself with anything that wasn't her, but then I saw the message from her. She said she needed to talk. I didn't know what to expect. My heart raced as I drove to meet her, my mind racing with all sorts of possibilities. Maybe she was finally going to tell me she felt the same way. Maybe she'd realized that Aaron wasn't the one for her. When I arrived, she was sitting on the bench outside our favorite cafe, the same spot we used to sit at when we were younger. She looked at me, her face pale, eyes red. I don't know how to say this, she started, and I could hear the tremor in her voice. "Lily, what's wrong?" I asked, already dreading what I might hear. I'm sorry. I know I've hurt you. I've been avoiding you, and I didn't mean to, but She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "I've been seeing Aaron for a while now, and it's serious. I love him, and I don't know how to explain this, but I can't be around you anymore. It's not fair to you." I could feel the ground beneath me shifting. "What are you talking about?" I said, though I could barely speak through the lump in my throat. She looked at me, and I saw it in her eyes, the same thing I had feared all along. I've been in love with him for a while now, and I need to give myself to that. I can't keep pretending with you, I'm sorry. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like the world went silent, like I couldn't hear anything but the thundering of my own heart. Betrayal, that's what it was. She had been seeing him all along. And all those late night talks, all the time we spent together, none of it had meant what I thought it did. I had been a fool to think I mattered to her the way she mattered to me. I don't know how long we sat there, not speaking, but it felt like an eternity. She didn't beg me to forgive her, didn't try to explain herself further. She just sat there, her eyes filled with regret and sorrow, and I sat there trying to hold myself together. Finally, I stood up. "I can't do this," I said, my voice rough. "I can't watch you be with him. I can't pretend everything's fine." And with that, I walked away. She didn't try to stop me. It's been months since that day. I still think about her sometimes, but the anger has faded, and now there's just a quiet ache. I can't blame her for loving someone else. I can't even blame her for choosing him over me. But I can never forget the way she tore my heart apart. The way she made me believe something was real when it never was. And I can't help but wonder if she ever truly cared for me, or if I was just another chapter in her life that she moved on from too easily. Love, I've learned, is fragile. It's not something you can control or make someone feel for you. And sometimes, even the closest of friendships can't survive. When one person falls harder than the other, I wish things had been different. I wish she had loved me the way I loved her. But in the end, life goes on, and you pick up the pieces of your heart and move forward. It was the kind of night you'd never forget. The air was crisp, the excitement in the crowd was electric, and the music, oh, the music was so alive, wrapping itself around every person, making their hearts beat faster. I remember walking into that venue, the crowd buzzing with anticipation for the band that had everyone in a frenzy. I wasn't expecting much, really. I just needed to get away from my routine, to feel something new for once. But then I saw her. I wasn't looking for anyone. Honestly, I wasn't in the mood for distractions. But the moment my eyes caught hers across the crowd, something just shifted. She was standing there a little to the side of the stage, holding a drink in one hand and her phone in the other, looking like she might have been texting someone. But it wasn't that, no. It wasn't any of the ordinary things that would have caught my attention. It was the way she smiled, the way her eyes lit up when the first song dropped, like she had just been waiting for that exact moment. I had to get closer. I told myself it was just to enjoy the show, nothing more. But we both knew that wasn't true. I pushed my way through the crowd, trying to keep my cool, trying to act like I belonged. But honestly, I was just a mess inside. My heart was pounding in my chest. And the closer I got to her, the more I felt the weight of every step. Was I going to say something? Or was I going to just stand there and look like an idiot? I didn't even realize how close I had gotten until I was standing right beside her. She glanced over at me, and I could have sworn I saw her eyebrow twitch, like she was deciding if she should say something too. I remember feeling like I couldn't breathe, like I was walking on air. "Hey, are you here alone?" I asked, trying to sound casual. But my voice was trembling like I was asking her to marry me on the spot. She looked at me, smiled again, and shook her head. "No, my friends are around. They're way up front, but I like being back here. It's quieter, easier to breathe." I nodded, trying to act normal, but in the back of my mind, all I could think was, she likes the quiet places too. "Yeah, I know what you mean," I said. "I always feel like I miss half the show when I'm up front. It's too loud, too crowded." She laughed a little, and the sound was like music to my ears. I think that's when I knew I was already hooked. We stood there for a bit, just listening to the music. The rhythm of the crowd moving together. It felt like the rest of the world was fading out, leaving just the two of us in our own bubble. I don't even remember how the conversation really started to flow. But eventually we were talking about everything, about the band, about the random things in life, the type of music we grew up with, what we wanted to do with our lives. It felt easy. Too easy, actually. Like we'd known each other for years. At some point, I found out her name was Ella. Ella. It was funny how simple it was, but how rare that simplicity felt. She wasn't like the other people I met, who always had 100 things going on at once. No, Ella was different. She seemed grounded in a way that made me feel like I could be real. Like I could let my guard down and not worry about saying the wrong thing. After a while, the concert hit its peak, and the crowd was jumping, singing every word, their voices blending together in perfect harmony. But even in the chaos of the night, I couldn't take my eyes off her. There was something in the way she danced to the music, something that made everything feel right in the world. We didn't even notice the time passing. We were too lost in our conversation, too lost in the moment. At one point, she glanced at her watch and sighed as if waking from a dream. "I should go find my friends," she said, glancing back at me. "But I'm really glad I bumped into you." I felt this stupid grin spread across my face. "Yeah, me too." "Maybe we could hang out sometime after?" she asked, her voice a little quieter, like she wasn't sure if it was too soon. "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. "I'd like that." And just like that, she was gone, swept away by the crowd, disappearing into the sea of faces. I stood there for a moment, feeling like I had just let something slip through my fingers. But at the same time, there was this quiet hope, this new feeling stirring inside of me. She wasn't like anyone I had met before. I spent the rest of the concert half-heartedly watching the band, but I wasn't really there. I was thinking about Ella, thinking about the next time we'd meet. Days passed, and I found myself checking my phone more than I should have, waiting for a text or a call, anything. I wasn't used to this. I wasn't used to being so vulnerable, but there I was, hoping for something that felt real, something more than just a fleeting connection. And then one evening it happened. I got a message from her, just like that. "Hey, it's Ella. I had fun the other night. Would you want to grab coffee sometime?" I remember the way my heart skipped a beat when I read it. I almost couldn't believe it. That coffee turned into dinners, and those dinners turned into more time spent together. We found out we had so much in common, like how she loved watching sunsets, just like me, or how she had this secret obsession with the same weird movies I grew up watching. We laughed at the strangest things and stayed up way too late talking about everything that mattered and even the stuff that didn't. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized I didn't want to go a day without seeing her. But it wasn't the kind of love you rush into. No, it was more like something that grew, something that started slow, built up over shared moments and quiet nights. The first time she kissed me, I didn't know how to feel. But I knew, deep down, that it was the most right thing in the world. Ella wasn't just someone I met at a concert. She was the person who made me believe that love could be simple, real, and something that didn't need to be rushed. And maybe that's the kind of love you find when you least expect it, right when you stop looking for it, and let the world surprise you. I still remember the first time I saw her. Her name was Lily, and she had this quiet way about her that made everything around her seem calmer. I wasn't the most outgoing guy back then, honestly. I was always afraid of putting myself out there, afraid of rejection, afraid of failing. It was easier to stay in the background to keep my head down. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to make a difference in anyone's life. But then there she was, Lily. She had a smile that could light up a room, but there was something about her eyes. She seemed distant, like there was something she was hiding, something holding her back from fully stepping into the world. I found myself wondering what it was. I didn't know much about her at first. We crossed paths in the hallway at school, exchanged the usual polite greetings, but there was always this invisible thread connecting us, even if we never spoke about it. It wasn't until one evening, when I saw her sitting alone by the lake after school, that I decided to approach her. "Is something wrong?" I asked gently, standing a little further away at first, unsure of how to break the ice. She looked up, startled, as though she hadn't realized someone was there. Her eyes were a little red, like she had been crying, but she quickly wiped her face with her sleeve and forced a smile. "I'm fine," she said, her voice soft but shaky. I could tell she wasn't fine. Something about the way she said it made me want to know more. "You don't have to pretend with me," I said. "If you want to talk about it, I'm here." She hesitated for a moment, and then, to my surprise, she opened up. Lily told me about the anxiety that gripped her every time she tried to speak in front of a crowd. She told me how she'd always felt like she was too much or not enough, like no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the voice in her head that told her she wasn't good enough. In that moment, I realized something. She wasn't so different from me. My own fears, my fear of speaking up, of failing, of being seen, had kept me trapped in a silent cage. I had my own insecurities that I hid behind. But hearing her talk about hers made me want to help her, just as much as I wanted to help myself. "I get it," I told her. "I'm not good at putting myself out there either. I've always been afraid of being rejected, of not being enough." She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I felt like maybe I wasn't alone in my fear. "Do you ever think about trying something different?" I asked. "Like, what if we both took small steps to face our fears together?" Lily looked at me a little hesitant, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. "What do you mean?" Maybe we start with something simple, I said, like speaking in front of just one person at a time, or sharing something vulnerable, little things. It doesn't have to be big. We agreed to help each other. At first, it was small things, speaking up in class, sharing stories from our lives that made us uncomfortable, even just sitting in a coffee shop together, without the weight of judgment hanging over us. Slowly, we became each other's safe place. When she had a panic attack before a presentation, I was the one who held her hand and reminded her to breathe. When I doubted myself and wanted to shrink back from something that scared me, she was the one who encouraged me to take that first step. The more we helped each other, the more I began to feel something deeper, something more than just friendship. It was like I could finally see the real her, the girl who was kind, funny, smart, and more than capable of handling anything she set her mind to. And I began to see something else too. The girl I was falling in love with. But it wasn't easy. We had moments of doubt, moments when we slipped back into our old habits, when we let our fears rule us. There was one night in particular when I almost lost her. I had gotten cold feet, afraid of being too vulnerable with her, afraid that maybe I wasn't enough for her. I pulled away, thinking that giving her space would be the best thing. But all it did was make her retreat into herself, and we both felt it. After a week of awkward silence between us, I couldn't stand it anymore. I realized I wasn't just scared of being rejected. I was scared of losing her. So I went to her. I found her by the lake again, the place where everything had started. I walked up to her and without saying anything, sat down beside her. She looked at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I'm sorry," I said, finally finding the courage to speak. I pulled away and I shouldn't have. I'm afraid of a lot of things. But losing you is one of the things I'm most afraid of. She looked at me for a long time and then, to my surprise, she smiled. "You're not the only one with fears, you know," she said softly. "But we've come this far, haven't we? We've faced so many things together." That was the moment everything shifted. We weren't just two scared people trying to survive. We were a team, two people who had been through the fire and come out stronger for it. From then on, things between us were different. We faced our fears, not as individuals, but as partners. We took on new challenges, whether it was a public speaking event, or simply expressing our feelings to each other without fear of judgment. The more we grew, the more we realized that our love wasn't about perfection. It was about acceptance, vulnerability, and facing the world together. Eventually, after years of supporting each other through everything life threw our way, I knew there was no one else I wanted to spend my life with. So I asked her to marry me. I still remember the look on her face when I did. Her eyes, full of emotion, were the same eyes I had seen all those years ago. The ones that once held so much fear. But now there was no fear in them, only love. She said yes, of course. And so, here we are, living a life that's full of challenges, full of growth, but also full of love. We still help each other face our fears, but now we do it hand in hand, knowing that no matter what happens, we'll always be there for each other. I never could have imagined that the girl I once saw sitting by the lake, so unsure of herself, would become the woman who would change my life, and who would become my wife. But here we are, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It all started when I was scrolling through social media one night. I wasn't expecting anything, just mindlessly tapping through my feed when I saw her post. Her smile, her energy, the way she looked at the world, it was all so magnetic. I don't know what made me do it, but I slid into her DMs hoping for a conversation. To my surprise, she replied almost immediately. We talked for hours that night. And the next day, and the next, it felt like something out of a movie. But I couldn't let myself get too carried away. I'd been burned before, I told myself. But she was different, her kindness, her humor, how easily we clicked. Soon we were texting all day, every day. I knew everything about her, or at least I thought I did. After a couple of months, we decided to meet in person. I was nervous, but there was this excitement too. What if the chemistry was different? What if she didn't like me in real life? But when I saw her standing there, waiting for me at the cafe, all those doubts melted away. She was even more beautiful than her photos. And when we sat down together, it felt like I had known her forever. That day was perfect. We laughed, we talked, and it was as if the whole world around us faded out. We started seeing each other more often. Movies, walks in the park, dinner at cozy restaurants. It was real now. This wasn't some fantasy or online connection. It was us, and for a while everything was perfect. But something started to change. Slowly at first. She would cancel plans last minute or seem distracted when we were together. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just busy. But then one night I found out she had been seeing someone else. A part of me didn't want to believe it. She was the last person I'd ever expect to hurt me. But the evidence was there. It wasn't just that she was seeing someone else. It was the way she'd lied to me about everything. Every time I'd asked her where she had been, or what she was doing, she had a different excuse. Her words didn't match her actions, and when I confronted her, she didn't even apologize. She just shrugged, like it was nothing. I thought I knew her, hell, I thought I loved her. But the truth was, I didn't know her at all. It felt like I'd been living in a dream, and now it was shattered. I was angry, heartbroken, confused. How could she have done this to me after everything we'd shared, after all the time we spent together, the plans we talked about for the future? I wanted to be mad at her, but I was more mad at myself. How could I have been so blind? I didn't want to believe it, but the truth was clear. I had trusted her and she had betrayed me. Now I was left picking up the pieces of my heart, trying to move on, knowing that what we had wasn't real, at least not for her.